Welcome to a night of poetry from Fulbright poets to Romania, Burkina Faso, and Finland. And all of us have been to the mentioned countries and are sharing our writing in response. I'm going to do just a quick raise of hand so we can learn the names of our poets. So our first poet is Ranesh Chakrapani. If you'd raise your hand, thanks. Christina A. Bishon. Tim Frandy. Cheryl J Fish. And Suzanne Andrus. Okay, so we're going to start with our first poet, and I will introduce him. All right, so our first poet is Rajnesh Chakrapani. He's a poet, a translator, and filmmaker. He holds an MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop. In 2021, in this October, he will be a Fulbright Fellow to Romania, where he will translate an anthology of contemporary Roma poetry. His chapbook of poems, Brown People Who Speak English, is published by Guest House Press, and you can read it online. His work has been placed in Asymptote, Lana Turner, Speculative City, Triquarterly, Literary North, Sequestrum, and Crevice. So please join me in virtually welcoming Raj.
Thank you, Suzanne. Let me just, so I wanted to talk a little bit about, so I actually haven't started my Fulbright. It was delayed one whole pandemic year, and I'm excited to begin. I have done some translations of a Roma futurist manifesto, which I'm looking forward to read in just a moment. But I also wanted to talk about the Fulbright itself. So my family is actually from South India, and my partner, my spouse, is from Romania. And I kind of had a fork in the road of which, when I was thinking about a translation project, of which language and which homeland to translate. And I think that's coming up a lot in my poetry, that both of these choices seemed very troublesome for me, and even the fact that I had to choose one. So my project is to translate an anthology of Roma poetry. So Roma poetry is kind of interesting because it's also a lot of song lyrics, it's a lot of political activism. And so I was thinking a little bit about futurist movements in the United States as well. And I'll just read a little bit from this manifesto from Mihaela Dragan. It's called "The Techno Witch is the Future, Manifesto for Roma Futurism." A spell said aloud during all phases of the moon and any day auspicious to art. Roma futurism is an artistic current that creates interactions of Roma culture with technology and witchcraft. It combines elements of science fiction, Roma history, fantasy, Roma subjectivity, magical realism, creative technologies with magical practices, and healing rituals. Roma futurism aims to re-examine the history of the Roma from a perspective that incorporates the healing of transgenerational pain and suffering genetically transmitted to the Roma by their ancestors, victims of slavery and the Holocaust. This radical practice creates performance rituals of healing that move us to the next nivel, a future where we can imagine a stop to the historic cycle of oppression against us. Roma futurism examines the uncertain future for the Roma in a racist Europe, insecurity that presses a reminder of the unknown and unrecognized history of the Roma. So that's just the beginning of that manifesto. So my project kind of imagines a lot of interviews and not just poetry, but a lot of paratext or like supplementary text to kind of like give some background to the struggle of Roma poets to be seen in their own country, but also in Europe and in the larger world, and kind of to push back against some of the stereotypes about Roma people and Roma poetry. I'm going to read a little bit of my poem. So I was thinking a lot about this idea of place, and if there can be a place for a displaced person or a brown person in the United States, like what would that place be? And I find a lot of that place in intimacy, like the intimacy of talking about translation, with family, thinking of family history and also map making. So I'll just read a few poems. I was thinking about map making as translation and home as translation. These sentences on the wall are maps you can make, and the map is a translation I can share with you, even though you already know that people jump off rooftops to walk through a city. Those maps in your school book showed your home as a territory from an above gaze. Those maps drew lines which you drew in dots. Maps that drew holes in walls, a cartography that pretends to be complete, but you intend to practice incompleteness. Camouflage is a message from all sides, a soundscape. Is translation taking sides? Your project is to do interviews, but you asked for the word in English. What is the presence of a dead writer in your translation? The English maps say it's not about you, but it's always about you. If you refused the first gaze and made a map as a scientific proposition, if everything had a name and a value like a botanical garden, the drill made a hole in the wall and also a hole in your diploma. The map pointed to where wealth was accumulated, and the drill was the sound of labor through the monologue. And every time the story started, it was interrupted by the women who screwed. Translation as some form of care, as a way of dealing with fear. Wishes come from the wastelands of the city, from the people not born into a language, but took ownership of a language's sorrows. You will not be able to find the sky in a locked room. The beauty you felt from the machine is the fantasy required to fuel you. These maps are a testimony that literature is relative. It's a lot of labor to keep memories. You have to learn your own body weight to serve the multiples of yourself, an idea better off with no grammar. Like the way your father tells you a story, he leaves out the most important historical moments as an aside. Like the way he never throws anything away in his kitchen, he collects dozens of thermoses and you ask him why does he need so many, and he answers, the extra thermoses are gifts to give people. Translation is not just between weak and strong languages. Words travel through jumping off places, looking down but not seeing, and who can feel in a certain way. The maps made your home look like their cities, the streets with dozens of zones and separations as a kind of normalization of the beauty of not going anywhere. You feel in a children's story and think in a kind of heroism and make homeland in places that try to destroy homeland. Something opened up in a failure to fill in the gap, a map with markings shot through with holes. The maps might be torn, but that's where the feelings come through. Before you even begin to translate, you learned of the dead writer who predicted how things were going to happen. The maps were more complex, and because they were harder to understand, everyone thought they must have been better. You start to remember the place where you lived for 2 years, and the only name that comes up to mind is Anyways. Like one of those great nights you spent in a cavernous kitchen while the rest of the people at Anyways stayed in their rooms. You spent 2 long winters there, and one person left the house, but nobody moved in. All of the faces of the people who lived at Anyways was from some underneath place. Friendships based on the floors people lived on. When you met them, they had come to Anyways to attend school. They were studying the history of the jukebox, or a jukebox of history, and both of you had other attachments, previous lovers who were still in the picture. In the beginning, they hated their classes and would stay at home cooking complicated recipes, subscribing to recipes. You grew up with little knowledge of the interior countries of family members. Distant cities were places with no place, names and city mixed up on a pair of dice. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, our next reader is Christina A. Bishon. She is an award-winning Romanian-American historian, theater artist, and poet. A Rhodes and Fulbright scholar, she currently teaches history at Metropolitan State University of Denver. She was a 2007 student Fulbright to Romania at the University of Bucharest. Bishon received her master's and doctor's of philosophy, her PhD in modern history from the University of Oxford. A playwright and spoken word artist, her creative work has appeared in the US, UK, Romania, and Vanuatu. Bishon runs the arts group Bucharest Inside the Beltway. A spoken word poet, her stage name is Lady Godiva. Her poetry book is Green Horses on the Walls. published in 2020 by Finishing Line Press. It was an Independent Press Book Award winner, a Human Relations Indie Book Award Gold winner in the historical category, a silver winner for reflection, and a silver winner for realistic poetry. So help me welcome Christina.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, and thank you, Fulbright. Thank you, all the other poets, for pulling together this remarkable creative force. I'm going to start saying a word about my Fulbright. It was a truly transformative year. I actually stayed longer. I got an extension. I was very grateful. And I was able to complete all of the research for my PhD while a student at the University of Bucharest, and that PhD is now a book. So Intellectuals in Fascism and Interwar Romania, a history book about cultural society and how its members veered towards fascism in the 1930s and ultimately on the Axis side of World War II. So if you're a history buff, this might interest you in addition to my poetry book. It was while a Fulbright that I met my closest collaborator, poet and playwright Ruxandra Pope in Bucharest, and together we founded the arts group Bucharest Inside the Beltway, which has had ongoing projects in the United States and Romania. We launched in 2013. And if you can read in the background, we have a Bucharest Inside the Beltway sign, and also here on my right, a Romanian flag hanging as always. So Green Horses on the Walls, my poetry. I am a spoken word poet. These were written for the stage in Washington, D.C., where I lived for almost a decade. My stage name is Lady Godiva. And for the Romanian speakers in the group and audience, you're familiar that the phrase Green Horses on the Walls means to have impossible dreams. And this collection is about my own Romanian heritage, what my family survived during the communist period, being a member of the diaspora, searching for my own identity. And the two poems I'm going to share are actually one written while I was a Fulbright. So the oldest poem in the collection, and the second about my love affair with the city, Bucharest, where I spent my Fulbright. So the title is Not for Anything Important, said the policeman. Ornate grand facades shelter empty rooms and hallways, the self-corruption of decadence. They take a cigarette break on the balcony, a group of 3 young women, too young to know what this building was meant to be, yet too old to care to make it better. They look out at the throngs of people, the hustle of the city center, the trams, the buses throbbing with life, within and amidst the falling apart, the dying. But that doesn't matter. The DJ mixes beats in the neighboring piazza in front of the National Theater. After work, the 3 young women will go there to the rally of one of the many political parties and dance and dance and smoke and laugh and hope for a new revolution. So I promise this next poem is a love poem to Bucharest. So here we go. Bucharest. It's the little things. Flower shops on every corner, for hello, for goodbye, for welcome, for your welcome, for bine ați venit, welcome, for it's an absolute pleasure, and for thank you, for I love you. It's gift bags and wrapping paper at every grocery checkout. It's the fumes of gasoline lingering amidst the general smell of pollution, mixed with cigarettes, mixed with cigars, mixed with pure, sweet, and delicious BO, all blanketed with the strongest perfume of Paris. It's walking on the street at night with no fear of harassment or someone revealing a firearm. It's being a woman in all one's femininity, and that being okay. It's being a man who loves and hugs, and that being okay. It's having coffee with your closest friend and actually having a conversation. It's a world with no agenda because all roads lead to nowhere anyway. That's why people escape to where you came from. It's parks full of the elderly spending afternoons watching grandchildren play. It's trams, buses, cars, motorcycles, mopeds, bicycles, and the metro. It's streets that you would rather just walk because every piazza leads you to a place that you'd like to be. It's a city of theaters, of universities, of libraries, of the most infamous nightclubs in Europe, in a language that is secret, because all Romanians speak English fluently anyway. It's private, like Eastern Christian Orthodoxy, where the priests conduct the entire liturgy behind an ornate golden painted gate. The private sacred space the packed church of parishioners will never get to see. Private, like how we don't talk about the past. It's days spent wandering, it's nights spent dreaming. It's a place where things just happen. Dynamic, immediate, and perpetually young. It's underground, brought to light, and it's anyone's native, expat, diaspora's playground. So thank you for listening to my poems. I'm going to drop my personal website in the chat, as well as my email. You can order, because we are avoiding Amazon these days, you can order a signed copy directly from me, and it's a simple process. So thank you for your support. Forgive me, I am now seamlessly transitioning into the next phase of our, shall we say, circle of literature. And that is to introduce the hostess, the mastermind of this amazing event, Suzanne Andrus. She is a poet whose work explores cultural identity, language, racism, and women's sexuality. She was a 2018 Fulbright US scholar to Burkina Faso, and her poetry book, Passion Seeds, about a Burkinabe and American love story, beautiful, won the 2013 Vernice Quebedo Pathways Poetry Prize. Her poems are in New Square, Slab, Frig, Colère, Genda, Rue, E7, CV2, and Visitant. See poems in shtick from her next book, which is entitled Death of an Unvirtuous Woman, which is due out September 2022 with Finishing Line Press. Hear more of her Burkinabe motorcycle poems on her YouTube channel, Suzanne Andrus, and I can say I follow her there, and I can also testify that her French is flawless. Please, Suzanne, take the floor.
Thank you. So this is going to be the most serious poem I'll read tonight. It's called Bleached History. It's from my book, Passion Seeds, that is available from Amazon. And I wrote this poem in response to a Burkinabe shaman, Malidome Patrice Somme's autobiography of Water and Spirit, particularly the part where he recounts being kidnapped at age 5 in 1960s in Burkina Faso by missionaries and escaping from their mission, their church at age 17. I've been shocked to learn that this happened in 1960. Some words that you'll want to know before this poem are dolo. It's a type of locally grown beer in Burkina Faso. Calabash. It's a dried out gourd that's used to drink the dolo or to serve meals in. And then I mentioned some names in Moray, one of the dominant local languages in Burkina Faso. Their first names, Narawende, Awa, and Yale. And baobab. It's a short, gnarly, sacred tree that is iconic to West Africa. And this is a baobab tree. Bleached history. 1. White through fire circles, mud houses, lingering handshakes. White through indigo, slick goat's necks, and the dolo-filled calabash. 2. A congregation so large, piled high up to the sky, for only one step to his throne, to finally come home. 3. Missionaries pleaded, cajoled for their congregation to reach that throne. They even stole boys to enroll and control, promising parents future rewards. Their heads were shaved and their mother tongue shamed, with the antelope skull worn at least once by all. Cultural carving beyond bones, branding Jean-Marc Antoine over Narrowindy's wings to God. On top, Awa's whispered to the river, and Yali's hope risen. 4. The red soil with its orange puddles held this pain, so full from what the whites called religious school. They tried to stitch boys against the hum of their ancestors in the wind, and with white cloth, bread, and wine, wined their minds for Christendom and the French curriculum. But whispers of songs sung in the field, lingering handshakes, compounds with family, and thatched roofs commanded feet home through thorn bush, stealthily under the moon, back close to mother's womb, from where solid like the baobab, they did first bloom. The next poems that I'm going to read are from my manuscript, Ouagales on Wheels, written during my Fulbright in Burkina Faso in 2019. Ouagadougou is the capital of Burkina Faso, and Ouagales refers to the people living in Ouagadougou. Burkina Faso is referred to as the African capital of two wheels, meaning motorcycles. There's a massive amount of motorcycles. Observing the Ouagalese on their motorcycles, I was particularly struck by how males occupy the space. And I'm going to show you a picture that goes with this poem. So here you can see three women, or four women, and this woman here with the green on her back, she has a baby on her back, and the baby is covered up. So this poem, looking at the photo, you can understand. Ouaga's mamas bend over, press their babies to their backs, and wrap their panya over and around, then knot it fast to secure the sleeping bundle. Next, before they ride, they cover them up, protecting their little noses and eyes from the dirt that flies. Ouaga mamas take their time, look left and right, because what's on their back is first on their minds. And the next poem is inspired by thinking of my students at the university who, they're interested in each other and they ride motos as well. It's called Flirting by or on Moto. Messieurs wear shades, run stop signs, and rev their engines up by rolling forward their wrists over and over to elicit the high sound of the Ouaga male in heat. At traffic lights, mademoiselles inspect messieurs, and upon spotting a hot monsieur, mademoiselles moisten their lips or timidly press them, as in a brief, ever so faint kiss. Or if he's really, really hot, they contract their thighs, close their eyes, and squeeze their knees to meet sign at the imagined touch. Mademoiselles glide down Rue Charles de Gaulle like swans on a pond, with their shoulders rolled back and their shoulder blades squeezed together tight, so their chests miraculously rise to attract the monsieur's eyes. They roll their hips forward so their luscious booties flow over the seat. Just another call out to the Ouaga male in heat. Oh, they are courageous whirlwind wonders that messieurs accurately measure in seconds. The higher the number, the faster monsieur speeds to impress that sexy gal. In one look, he knows exactly how fast to accelerate. Mademoiselles and messieurs imagine sitting together on the same seat, with thighs pressing, chests and backs rubbing. Oh, the visions that make the road fly. This next poem is something I witnessed many years ago in Burkina Faso. Sex on Moto. It's 1 or 2 a.m. They are parked by the dam. An old homeless man watches the fire in a large can several yards away from them. She has a red mini skirt. He sits as if driving, and she straddles him, facing him. They pull towards each other. She pushes up and away from the dam and bridge, aims for the fire with her hips. He pulls her to him to land down again and again, her hair, hips, and that oh so tiny space void of fabric. The moto stares across the dam, wants to go forward and forward. The last poem is called Wagga Cowboy Riding at 1900. And I mentioned a couple Burkinabe foods, toe, which looks just like tofu, but it's made from cassava, and sumbala, which is a pungent, strong seasoning. Wagga Cowboy Riding at 1900. He stood up while driving his moto on the highway, his gaze fixed forward, speeding for steaming toe and sumbala, speeding for a cool shower. Standing tall, proud, like a Maharaja on an elephant, proceeding through a village where the masses moved away from the royalty with each step, he sped forward. He stood tall, proud, and darted around slower cars with people seated inside, the pleasure of the wind cooling his heated skin. Myself seated in a car, I wondered why this man was on his feet instead of on his seat. To me, it seemed quite a tiring feat. Maybe his balls or butt hurt and he couldn't sit. Maybe his sciatica was pinching. Maybe he was wet down there and needed to dry. Or maybe he just wanted to rise up and soar after hours of being bent over, told no, and made to feel small. Thank you. And I'm going to introduce our next poets. All right, so Tim Frandy was a 2009 to 2010 Fulbright Scholar in Finland. He is a member of the Sami American community, that's an ethnicity from Finland, and he's an assistant professor of folk studies at Western Kentucky University. Working predominantly with Indigenous peoples, their research includes decolonization, public folklore, and the environmental humanities. Frandy's recent translation of Inari Sami folklore is the first polyvocal anthology of Sami oral tradition ever published in English. An occasional writer of poetry and literary nonfiction, Frandy's work, whether scholarly or creative, uses traditional discourses, metaphors, and relationalities to create surrealistic and lyrical meditations on ingenuity in the world today.
Logisto. I have two poems to share, and my book is separate, but I put a link in the chat of traditional Sami stories from the village of Anar or Inaru. The first poem is my pretentious one. It involves the fact that traditionally even today, we recognize 8 seasons in the year instead of 4. And each one of these is a short meditation on how the sacrality of creation and mythology is present in the everyday experiences that we encounter in the woods. So it's called 8 seasons, I guess, and it starts in fall, winter, which is a traditional start of the year for us. Clouds low in the sky, wind sings through white pine needles, low spiraling gusts beneath. A raven's call, its wings the sound of an elder's breath. The red squirrel has few secrets. The nuthatch carries them beneath their wing. Like bears, we wait Novembers for one last meal, settling down into the falling snow, nuzzling into our dens, beneath earth, for the Uldot to sustain us in our slumbers. Snowbound forest of maple and birch, a still brisk morning, the swallowed whispers of a breeze, tracks in the fresh snow, chickadee, red squirrel, ermine, deer, fox, coyote. Our ski tracks also in these porcelain dunes, waiting to be erased by fresh snows and the inevitable coming of spring, cleansed and reborn, a circle as old as time. Spring, winter. Skiing atop the ice crust in late winter, Sauna, we sprout wings and fly, free from gravity's burden. A blue jay diving low beneath the heavy branches of balsam fir, passing deer herded together in the deep snows, running effortlessly aside them, wonder in their eyes at their strange cousin running like a wolf. Spring. Mud in the forests, icy yassa mounds, the last ruins of winter, a shadow of a shadow, maples bleeding sweet nectar, oaken wood smoke wafting in the air. Lake ice deconstructed into honeycomb. Chimes and rattles dance as the wind blows the lake into song. Fish wandered ashore, smelt, walleye, musky, ice cold waters, slow, wet hands. We too are blown into song as the world awakens. Spring, summer. Light flickers yellow-green in the forest, budding out trees and the first smells of earth long forgotten. Witch brooms mark the fairy rings, crouching in shadows, walking with cedar in our shoes, only a stone's throw from the Dacha's house. Summer. The rich smell of medicines in the floating bog, Labrador tea and pitcher plant, sphagnum moss and cranberry, dark silty ponds with dace and sticklebacks, lost worlds lie beneath, shepherded by lanky giants of tamarack and black spruce. The earth bends under our bare feet. Cold water seeps through the moths. Each element shapes each other in the celestial womb. Muskrat and loon dive deep. Turtle lies in wait. Beaver watches from atop their lodge and marvels at our strange gate. Summer, autumn. Hot sun in the water, pushing through the Menominee. It's falling good and the rice moves beneath you. It finds its way into you, Menomin. A break on a white pine island for an apple and some water. An eagle's nest above, feathers on the ground. The rice birds are feasting. Finally, autumn. Working in the boat, heaving uncle's chipped suic lure overhead like the swing of an 8-pound maul. A world beneath of hidden islands, corridors, places of ambush, of sanctuary. An architecture of the spirits. Where is Biek on my wending today? The crisp air reconnects body and soul. Breathe, feel. We return to Saraka's hearth. The second one I'd like to share came to me in a dream many years ago when I was a young child and sort of grown over the years into something different, but also similar. So I call this Dream Journal, July 31st, 1985. It's mostly like a prose poem thing. We went to the blueberry patch where we always go in late July, a pine barrens on the Michigan border, hundreds of acres of open in the deep forest and blueberries as plentiful as biting black flies. Towards the western edge of the patch, one small lake with an island in the center. I was there with my parents, my older brother and my sister. The smell of warm sweet fern in the air. Now my family is a family of berry pickers. My grandmother was the fastest berry picker I'd ever seen. She was ambidextrous, actually left-handed, and forced to use her right as a child, alongside being forced to learn English. Don't listen to what your parents tell you, her teachers scolded her. You're in the new world now. I admired her so. The blueberries were thick this year, abundant and heavy on the vines like grapes, stripping handfuls from the plants with love and tenderness. We filled our pails, repurposed lard buckets from the 1960s, heaped dangerously high on top. Then we found some plastic shopping bags in the bed of the truck, and we decided to pick those full too. As we worked closer to the lakeshore, we could see it, the undergrowth of the island, carpeted in radiant blue. My father's pupils dilated, and he became quiet in anticipation. Let's swim over, he said. We stripped to our undergarments and we swam, the two of us. The island was like nothing we'd ever seen. Massive berries like plums on the ground. My father started picking immediately, grabbing the ripe fruit as fast as he could. I wandered in from the shore, stepping carefully among the berry brush, scrambling up a sand embankment to the center of the island. And that's when I saw it, the biggest blueberry in the entire world. It stood 8 feet tall, high and round, radiating heat from the afternoon July sun, its sweetness coloring the air. I gasped audibly. When my father saw it, his mind immediately set to work on how to retrieve the berry. He pulled his poko to cut its stem, and together we heaved and rolled the massive berry towards the shore, carefully trying not to damage it in any way. I'll cut the berry in half, and we'll paddle the halves across the lake like boats. We set to work. The berry boats and crude paddles he fashioned sufficed, but tracked poorly in the water as we paddled carefully and slowly toward the mainland. But then something was not right. As I squinted to peer down into the water, I could see a swarm of perch and bluegill and crappie had surrounded us. They began to nip at the berry boats, attacking with ever increasing virulence until the water churned and bubbled and frothed beneath us. Our boats grew smaller and smaller. By the time we reached the shore, the panfish had chewed our berry boats to nothing. Little remnants of berries washed up on the shore, mixing with lake foam and dirt. Useless. Well, said my father, I suppose. We loaded up what berries we had in the truck, and we began the long and slow drive down the washed out logging road ruts out of the deep wood. Ologisto.
Okay, great, thank you. Perfect poem for as we're finishing picking blueberries this season. And now we're going to go on to our last poet, who we're celebrating her book that just came out. Okay, so our next poet is Cheryl J Fish. She's the author of recent poetry books, Crater and Tower, reflecting on trauma and ecology after the Mount St. Helens volcanic eruption and the terrorist attack of 9/11. And most recently, The Sauna is Full of Maids, which just came out this June with Shanty Arts Publishing, celebrating Finnish sauna culture, travel, and friendship. And it has wonderful pictures in color too, which I think Cheryl will show. Her debut novel, Off the Yoga Mat, will be published in 2022 by Livingston Press. She has published essays on Sami film and photography in response to extraction in Arctic Phenoscandia in journals, blogs, and anthologies. Fish was a 2006 to 2007 Fulbright professor in Finland, lecturing and conducting research in the area of environmental justice and North American studies at the University of Tampere in Finland. She teaches at Borough of Manhattan Community College, City University of New York. Please help me welcome.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I want to thank Suzanne and Rob Ellis for organizing this. And Tim's translations of Sami Inari folklore have been inspirational to me as well. So since my Fulbright, I've been going back regularly to Finland. And in the introduction, in the preface to my book, I talk about how I recognize the cultural significance of the sauna, which has been declared a UNESCO representative intangible cultural heritage of humanity. So I'm thankful that I spent a lot of time getting to know people, relaxing and dealing with the heat and cold that you do in the cycles of the sauna. And I'm going to read a few poems that are specifically about sauna experience. And then I'm going to read a few others that branch out into geopolitics, friendship, and environment. Okay, so I'm going to read The Thin Man at the Cuci RV Sauna. So you could see the picture. The first picture was what the sauna looked like before the fire, and then the second one is after the fire. The thin man wearing a cap at the Cuci RV smoke sauna makes it hot enough to melt a stone. When he throws water, steam hisses in the small wooden room. Lips sear off my face. He cultivates heat like wanton love. His sampo, his compass, molding the pyre itself. Sing your song backwards. The smoke flew up the flue while we ate reindeer meat and lingonberry. Smoke curved in wisps, then it shot from the walls and chimney. Firefighters came to unfurl their hoses. We watched them spray and shout water, and the thin man, for whom he is a favorite toy, walked out immaculate. Let me just say that the references are to the Kalevala. So the Sampo is sort of the holy grail of the Kalevala, which is the Finnish national epic poem that was compiled by Elias Lonrot of oral folklore and mythology, originally published in 1835. And I was inspired in part by Sami mythology, but also by Kalevala, and then mostly by my friendships. The next poem I'm going to read is called Another Round. And I just scroll down to that one here. So you could see you could kind of see the book as I scroll down here. Okay, so this picture here is Niels Aslak. I wanted you to see him. Okay. Another round of heat. In the sauna, water rolls off Lolu. An older lady, a mistress of the Northland, decides how hot, how often it hisses. Her skin glows in orange-rind heat. Her friend prods her. A timid guest, I am not able to immerse in the gray ice lake. They clean their feet in the bucket after their plunge, naked except for paper shoes. The sound of singing wind, a cold May, long light. How does that sampo in the epic produce grain, salt, and gold from thin air? Niels Aslak Valkiepa, Sami artist and poet, built his house on the Alta Road in a sloping rock resembling a turf hut. He yoinked his song in a six-sided room. The music almost died out. His journey paralleled birds and reindeer, spread his culture, migrating. He preferred to stay by himself, singing in the north. I wish you would join me instead of keeping your distance, like the magpie in Helsinki watching from the roof of a car. This next poem was actually turned into a song by composer Katie Bishop. So I'm really grateful for that. Flesh from Stone. Jessup tells me he slept with that slim married woman he spots in the cafe in Callio. She's sharing a salad and some fish with her husband. We do not stay. It would be too awkward. The urge to fuck her has passed. Even though he identifies as gay, Jessup was drawn to her glow, cat mixed with witch. The sensual arts can't be explained. Later, Jessup takes me to the bar near the water where he meets men he takes home. He cannot imagine loving them longer than a midnight sun's worth of calories. I have been alone, unable to connect dashes and dots, find magnetic friction. In Helsinki, I see statues of water nymphs, beautiful marble bodies, and magpies sounding like American crows. Jessup experiences chemical sensitivity, electromagnetic allergies, feels the pull of nighttime jazz. He takes me to the saunas, the large one by the Olympic Stadium, the smoke sauna outside the city with a lunch buffet. We talk and sweat and drink beer. The city unfolds in the present of presence, melding steam from green, sex between solitude, separating flesh from stone. So my poems, I guess they alternate in a way between modern life in Finland, queer culture, karaoke pubs, and then the ancient ways, and so that's kind of what I'm trying to do here is kind of juxtapose those things. The next poem I'm going to read, Tim inspired me because he read a poem about berry picking. So this poem is called Foraging. Here's my lousy forages. Here's my mushrooms and my cloudberries. I'm new at foraging. I didn't grow up with it. So with Auntie in the woods, I learned to spot Hercutati, AKA Boletus, edulis, AKA porcini, mushrooms, large brown caps, tubes extending from underside. In Italian folklore, they spout at the new moon. Saute them for a slightly nutty, meaty, fruity flavor. the small ones, maggot-free. Once I understand where and when they may appear, even late in the season, I am hooked. It takes patience, a good eye. With Lena and Kaiser, I'm eager to pick yellow cloudberries in bogs. We put on high boots, carry buckets to find them. Glamorous, rare in a mosquito haze in the Swedish Sami area, not far from Kiruna. Rubus cameoris, grown in wild alpine, Arctic tundra, boreal forest. Every man's land means Norwegians can drive over, grab a prime spot, and they do. Finns make laka liquor from these yellow berries. The soft, juicy, fleshy berry garners high prices in markets. Kaiser's mother, Anna, prepares jam and pancakes from the contents of their nearly full buckets. They serve me from this bounty, even though I did not pull my weight. Literally, this is all I got. But I still got to eat. I still got to eat everything. They were really kind to me. The next poem is also about food. And it's a prose poem, like some of these are. For this one, I'm going to share a different screen. Live simply. Dave's housewarming. After I eat Leah's green nettle bread, her seed bread, her fruit loaf, drink her homemade wine, admire the sweater she knitted for her daughter, we dance at Dave's housewarming party. Dave swapped England for Finland. Brexit burned toast in his throat. The improvisers turn up their computerized trance music. A keyboard is struck with a toothbrush and a sex toy for vibration while we shake. Noako from Japan pressed a print of fern into a card, wrote my name in Japanese characters. She swallows salmon soup with gratitude. After the Fukushima nuclear accident, they test vegetables for radioactivity. 2, Leah and Leon's home. Leah and Leon invite me to their home down a dirt road in the direction of Kemi. He makes sailboats from wood, practices his craft, can't hear in one ear. Might he sing like old Väinämöinen in the Kalevala as he chops wood and considers the origin of words? Photos on the wall display every hull he's forged. Leah knits socks and mittens, pink and gray, purple, red, thick for cold months, filling up shelves. She sews clothes for a baby doll dressed like a child of the North. Her workroom holds 4 sewing machines with various needles. We live simply, she says. We don't need much. I call her Martha Stewart of Northern Ostrobotnia, but she's never heard of Martha. 3, Ali's room. Ali from Afghanistan lives upstairs. He grew up dreaming of Nokia, gadgets, magic screens. When his parents died during the war, he walked to this country of reindeer and boreal forest, learned to speak Finnish. At first, he helped Leon build boats, but now he earns more at the nuclear plant being built with Putin. He maintains machinery, operates gauges, troubleshoots. His axe hangs in Leon's tool shed. Leah's socks line his boots. And I have one more. It's actually the last poem in the book. 2 maids in the Tulo Towers sauna. And this refers to my friend Annika Lindman, who I met my first time in Finland. She was the first person who showed me around Helsinki when I was with my son Josh. He was 7. We had just arrived and were tired, and she took us on the streetcar to show us Helsinki, and we've stayed friends all these 13 years later. 2 maids in Tulo Towers sauna. Annika arrives at the small sauna in Tulo Towers. Heat rises like tolerance. Our friendship expands and quiets over 11 years since I first visited Suomi. We eat and drink and shop and walk. 2 maids sharing a view of Helsinki from the 11th floor deck, taking non-traditional paths, content with in-betweens. How pleasant for me to flit here. We pour water on the rocks over nakedness, leave imperfection and judgment, sweat and cold, wood and skin, the time of dry smoke, music collective and separate. Annika collects lamps of artificial light that shine in the darkness of her living room. omnipresent candles in the night. She visits her aging father in their cottage near the archipelago where Russians purchase islands. I lost my father this year. He slipped out of the room. The Gulf of Finland edges against moonlight, tumescent water resembling a lake. The happy and the lucky by the headlands, longing for eternal things. Thank you all for coming.
I wanted to thank everybody for coming. We have a few minutes for a question and answer. So if you want to type any questions in the chat or the Q&A. And I had a question, some questions I think we can also ask each other questions, but I wondered, Raj, with the Roma futuristic movements, I was wondering what year you're translating that from, or I mean, you know, when they were published first.
So it's kind of been, I co-translated with someone else who has already done a translation. I think she wrote it very recently, like a couple years ago. Yeah, my understanding is that she was thinking of the concepts at a residency. But I kind of, that's the thing with like my translation work. I was thinking of updating it a bit and kind of thinking about the idea of a manifesto and poetry kind of merging together. But Mihaela actually does a lot of great video work as well. So yeah, it's from about a couple years ago, and it's already been translated. So my translation would be a new version of that, which I'm looking at. Yeah.
Great. And does anybody else have questions of it?
There's a question in the chat from Mark.
Yeah. Okay, so Mark says, thank you for so many wonderful poems, beautiful accounts of what we miss in these virtual times, the smells of Romanian, BO, the taste of berries, the sounds of motorbikes. How has the last year of lockdown impacted your creative practice, positive or negative? So, Tim, would you like to say something?
Sure. Well, for me personally, it's been quite hard because the source of my creativity kind of flows from the place I'm from, and being able to be connected to that. I grew up in Anishinaabe lands in northern Wisconsin and Michigan, and being detached from that and the people there has been very jarring since I and my family are in Kentucky right now. So that's just me, though. I'm sure other people can draw inspiration from it too.
Christina? Oh, sorry, you need to unmute yourself.
No, I hear what Tim has gone through. I'm very much an urbanite city dweller, needing to be out and about. So and also I'm a theater artist. And so not being able to, be in the space collaborating with people has been emotionally really hard. I have been fortunate that Romania and Romanians are the most cyber connected people on the face of the earth. And we have all capitalized on that space. And so I've done a lot of virtual projects, like directing and producing Zoom plays, for example. And with the Romanian Cultural Institute in New York, Bucharest Inside the Beltway partnered to produce a literary series. Suzanne, we had talked about this, promoting Romanian, Canadian, and American female authors, women writers. And so that began last October, and we're kind of nearing the end of that. So there have been outlets for my creativity. So I guess it's been productive, but it certainly has not been ideal.
And Raj?
Yeah, it's been a challenge. It's kind of hard to structure like my writing time, and I think it took a while to kind of realize that I actually had a lot more opportunities sometimes virtually than I had in person. Recently, I was part of a group of Palestinian translators with the Open Society Network in Europe, and I probably wouldn't have been able to do that without the idea of like being able to both attend virtually and in person. So it's both been a challenge, but also there have been some openings where I've been able to join communities that I might not have before.
Thank you. And Cheryl? Your video, mute, unmute.
Oh, sorry. I would say the first few months of the pandemic were very hard, and I didn't feel like writing at all. But then eventually I did, and I had 2 books come out, 2 books of poetry come out in this period. So a lot of time has been spent trying to, you know, do promotions, which is not really, it's not the thing that creative people like to do, but we have to do it anyway. So I guess I'd say I had my ups and downs, but the thing that got me through was this bike group with my friends here in New York City. On Sunday mornings during the initial months of the pandemic, we would bike ride early in the morning through Manhattan, and then have socially distanced coffee, and it just was kept us all going to have that social connection at a regular time. And you know, now we don't have that anymore. So many more things have opened up. So, but those like first few months from like the fall of 2020, and I mean the summer of 2020 into the like winter of 2020 were very precious to have those times with friends. And I wrote like a Canterbury Tale kind of prologue about our biking. It's very goofy, but it was fun to write about our different personalities, because you know, personalities always come up when you do things together with groups of people. So yeah, so anyway, teaching online I do not love, I have to say. I really do not love it at all. Very challenging.
Thank you. And Cheryl, if you could post, I thought it would be interesting, the link to the song that was made from your poem Flesh from Stone.
Oh, I don't have it handy. I have the sheet music, but unfortunately the one time it was performed, the recording got lost of that. I'm very sorry to say. So I don't have the recording of it, but I do have the sheet music of it. If anyone's a musician and they're interested in it, I could get that to you. I'll put my email address here. So that was really unfortunate. It was at the Zinc Bar in the Village at a reading series there before the pandemic. So, you know, I'm going to do my first live reading next week in Queens. So it's been several years since done a live reading. But thanks for asking, Suzanne. That's very kind of you.
Does anybody else have other questions, including our poets, you know, or comments? Or
Well, Suzanne, how was it for you, for your creativity?
I agree with Cheryl that there were parts where I didn't feel like writing, you know, and the isolation, as you said, in the creative isolation. Although you, Christina, do theater, I was really, have been missing theater so much. I love to go to the theater, and that fuels my creativity on the participant end. And I, you know, there's just so much you can only do with watching videos, and even when you watch theater online or the Zoom productions, which you know, I've seen from my local theater, and some were more at a distance, then some actually wove the technology in, so it became this new sort of medium. And I think, as Raj said, that realizing that the technology can also help us expand beyond our borders has been nice. The fact that all of us can be reading in different states together is pretty awesome. And on a personal note, I've enjoyed having my friends in different states get together too. So I try to think about that, but there is this lament with being homebound. I'm appreciative to live in the countryside though, and I like getting out in the parks and nature. So
There's a question about, I don't know how many people write prose poems of, I guess with mine, you could see which were prose and which weren't because I showed them on the screen. But Tim, you said yours was a prose poem, and Suzanne or Christina, I don't know if your poems are so-called prose poems. My friend Mary Jane had that question. So how do you decide what is a prose poem and what appears more like a traditional poem? Anyone want to answer that?
I can say something, but I'm actually really curious in what you would say, Cheryl,
Okay.
in response to that. But literally mine was one of process because I was asked to do a storytelling event. And so I told this dream as a story that I had. And then when I wrote it out, because I was supposed to write it out for someone, I just happened to write it as a story instead of, I mean, it's more of a narrative in a long form, and I didn't think it would work well on the page otherwise, but it's still kind of meditative. I don't have a good answer, but it's just one of process for me with that individual piece.
Well, the poem that I read, Live Simply, because that sort of had 3 little sections, like started with the housewarming, then going to Leah and Leon's home in near Kemi, and then Ollie's room upstairs. It just seemed natural to make it into like mini little chapters. And then a poem I didn't read that's in the book, Father and Son in a Rowboat. That's also a prose poem. I think for me, the prose poems have more of a narrative impulse, even though there's a narrative impulse in the more traditional verse poems. The ones that are prose poems maybe have slightly more narrative impulse. And since most of you know, I also write flash fiction, traditional short stories, and I have a novel coming out. So like, I already have that narrative sort of takes many different forms for me. I have a lot of spaces in my poems that are more traditional poetic style, which I think has to do with breathing and breaking the lines. That I find something really interesting in a traditional poem to mess with lines and spacing. And I do that less when they're prose poems. I don't know if it's really an answer, but it just, I think some of them just come out one way or the other.
Raj, do you have
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about like the unit of measurement. So I've been thinking about like just the sentence as a unit of measurement, and thinking a little bit about as I started translating like what I wanted to include in my poetry as well. And one poet translator I really love is Rosemary Waldrop, and she writes these like wonderful like paragraphs. And I think one of the words she uses that I love is like the intimacy of sentences. So I think for me, like poetry didn't capture like all the things I wanted to do with storytelling. I feel like the poems I want to write need to have context, need to have like some like footnote material in a way. So yeah, I've just been really struck on this idea of like creating these like, sentences of intimacy or poetry, or even like, the loneliness of sentences in a way.
Nice.
Could you say more about the loneliness of sentences? That's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, I do have a published, like that's the title of a prose poem I published recently. But yeah, I was just thinking just about like what form or like what appearance does for a poem a bit. And yeah, I love what Cheryl said about the breadth as well. Yeah, I think again, like a lot of my poetry have like a lot of my poems have nonfiction in them as well. So there's like a lot of like double meaning, and kind of like this idea of a sentence can also, I mean, obviously that can also be like having to do with exile as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't write many prose poems. And the few I have, I guess, um, I feel almost stopped in reading my own poems when they're in prose. But Christina, any comments on prose poems?
Well, actually, I'm in agreement with everyone. Prose poems for me are storytelling, and the other genre, creative genre I write in is playwriting. So I think that's where it's kind of like playwriting, prose, and then poetry, the sort of the bridge to poetry. But I also write spoken word poetry. So for me, it doesn't matter what it looks like on the page, which has certainly thrown some readers off with Green Horses. It's about how it sounds and is delivered. So yeah, but prose poems for me always come out as a story.
Great, thank you. Well, we just, I think that is concluding our evening here, and I'd like to thank Fulbright for allowing us this platform, and Rob Ellis with Fulbright, who was so gracious to do a trial tech run last week, and then before tonight's performance. Thank you so much for staying in the background to support us too. And thank you to Cheryl, Tim, Christina, and Raj for your time and sharing your creativity. And I'm so happy to meet you all too, fellow Fulbright poets. I hope that if we have Fulbright poets listening and other poets, that you reach out and connect with us. We're still sort of in this lockdown period, and it's really nice to meet new people, which I find is so hard in this COVID time. So